You're listening to live courtroom coverage of the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. Now, back to the courtroom.
All right, you're going to come right up here in front of my clerk and be sworn in.
Good morning. Can you please sign in first and last? Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, have a seat up here to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Vanessa Milkey. I'm a Forensic Scientist 3 for the City of Mesa Forensic Services.
How long have you worked there?
I have been there for over 12 years now.
And can you tell us your training and experience to work both as a forensic scientist and then, I guess let's start there.
Okay. I have a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Arizona State University. While in college, I was a forensic services intern for about 8 months for the City of Mesa Forensic Services. After college, I was a laboratory technician for United Blood Services for 1 year. Prior to my current position, I was a crime scene technician for the Chandler Police Department for almost 2 years. After I was a crime scene technician and I was hired at the City of Mesa, I completed the required serology and DNA training that took about 2 years.
All right, so what is your current role? What do you specifically do?
I examine items for the presence of biological fluids, conduct DNA analysis, prepare samples for DNA analysis, take notes, write reports, and review reports.
So you talked about training specifically at the City of Mesa with regards to DNA testing and analysis. How long of a process is that?
It took me about 2 years to complete all of the required training, and then every single year I'm required to do a minimum of 8 hours of continuing education.
And are there any type of quality assurance processes to ensure that your analysis is correct and your conclusions are accurate?
Yes, during training, I was required to complete competency tests along the way for each new thing that I learned. And then every single year, I have to do 2 proficiency tests to show that I'm proficient in serology and DNA analysis.
Now, at the Mesa Police Department, do you separate sort of this process and have one person take cuttings of swabs or evidence to prepare them for testing, and then another person who will take those to develop those unknown profiles for analysis?
Yes, we have serology and DNA. So there are some analysts that just do serology, and there's some that are trained in both serology and DNA analysis. For a particular case, it could be the same individual doing serology and DNA, or it could be different analysts.
Okay. So let's start with talking about DNA. What is it?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's considered the blueprint of life. You get half of your DNA from your mother and the other half from your father. Every individual has a different DNA profile with the exception of identical twins.
When the police are collecting biological evidence from a scene for DNA testing, are there different types of biological evidence that can be used for DNA testing?
Yes, the a DNA profile can be generated from hair, semen, saliva, sweat, skin cells, blood.
So you talked about skin cells, and if we are talking about swabbing different areas that people touch, if a person touches an item, do they always leave behind DNA?
No, not always. It depends on the type of surface. If an individual is wearing gloves, they're not going to leave behind their DNA.
Okay. Does the environment also impact potentially your ability to obtain DNA from a swabbed surface that someone touched?
Yes, there are different environmental conditions such as heat, moisture, sunlight that can all damage the DNA. And also if there's any type of cleaning products that have been applied, such as bleach.
So just because a person touches an item doesn't mean you're going to be able to find the DNA there.
That's correct.
And then we've been talking about sort of a DNA profile. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, a DNA profile is kind of like a graph. There's different locations that I'm looking at that I am comparing from, let's say, a question sample to a known sample. So a known sample is something where I know where the sample was collected from. A typical known sample is buccal swabs, which cells are the cells from the inside of your cheek. So I have an expected DNA profile. And an unknown profile would be something from a crime scene where I don't know what the DNA profile is, but I'm going to look at all 23 different locations and I'm going to compare that to my known samples.
So when you're creating a DNA profile, do law enforcement agencies generally look at the same locations on the DNA, long strand of DNA?
Yes, different laboratories use different what's called kits, but it's all very similar locations.
You're not looking at every spot on the DNA chromosome, right?
No, just 23 different locations.
When you are looking at a DNA profile from a known source let's start with a known source, are you able to generally create a single source DNA profile?
From a known sample?
Yeah.
Yes, typically I am able to generate a full DNA profile from a known sample.
Okay. And like someone's blood would be a known sample.
Yes.
Now, if you have a cutting or a swab from a crime scene, are there different things that might affect your ability to develop a full DNA profile?
Yes, sometimes there's not enough DNA present for me to have a conclusive DNA profile, or sometimes there's too much DNA there where it's too complex, where I can't pull anything out or make any comparisons or conclusions.
Is one of the things we're talking about when we say there's too much DNA referred to often as a mixture?
A mixture is anything that's more than one individual contributing to that DNA sample.
And if you have a mixture, are you always able to tell us all the people who are part of that?
No, sometimes there's just too much information there where I can't separate out the different numbers and determine how many people are contributing to the sample.
When you develop a DNA profile from a swab from a crime scene, and there's a mixture of people who have contributed to that, do you ever have anything called a major contributor? What is that?
Yes, a major contributor is just the individual that's contributing the majority of the DNA to the sample.
And if you have a mixture, you told us you're not always able to tell all the people. Are you always able to tell us how many people contributed?
No, I don't always know how many people contributed, but we usually give a minimum number that the analyst would think is contributing to that mixture.
Okay. So if we see there's a major contributor, is there such a thing as a minor contributor?
Yes, the opposite of the major would be the minor. So if there's a major component, there's also a minor component. And with every sample, the minor component may not be conclusive.
Okay. When you are creating these DNA profiles of these unknown sources, are you able to tell sometimes if there's a male or female contributor?
Yes, there's a sex-determining marker called amylogenin. So a female would have an X and an X, and a male would have an X and a Y. If I'm looking at that sex-determining marker, if I see an X and a Y, then that is an indication that the profile is from a male. If there's a really big X and a really small Y, that would be an indication that there's a female present and there is also a male present. Because if there's just one male or two males, I would expect the X and the Y to be about the same height.
So when you are provided with a known sample of someone and some questioned sample that was taken from a crime scene, what are you asked to do with that? What does the analysis involve?
The DNA process is a 4-step process. The first step is called extraction, where the cells are broken open and the DNA is released from the cell. The second step is quantitation, where I'm determining how much DNA I have in a sample, if any at all. The third step is amplification. It's kind of similar to a DNA Xeroxing machine, where I'm making millions of copies of the DNA. And the last step is called detection, where I'm generating a DNA profile. The DNA profile from the unknown profiles can be compared to the DNA profile from the known individuals to determine if there's a match or no match.
Okay. So in January of 2020, was the Mesa Police Department lab doing DNA testing for the Gilbert Police Department?
Yes, and we still do.
And so was the process for the Gilbert Police Department to send over any known and any questioned DNA samples to you to see if you could develop DNA profiles and reach any conclusions?
Yes.
In this case, were you provided with several cuttings from Lisa Perry from swabs from a vehicle?
Yes, I was.
And were you provided with a DNA profile for an Alexander Cox that was developed by Emilyn Sapinoso?
After I completed the analysis of my samples, I compared the results from my samples to any known individuals that were also submitted for the same case.
And was that for the Alexander Cox?
Correct.
Were you then asked to develop DNA profiles from those cuttings that Lisa Perry had given to you?
Yes.
And then compare those to Alexander Cox?
Correct.
Were you provided a cutting of a swab from the steering wheel of the Jeep?
Yes.
Were you able to create a DNA profile from that?
May I refer to my report?
If that would help refresh your recollection.
Go ahead.
Yeah, do you have that with you?
I do, I can.
Or do you need a copy?
Is it okay if it has writing on
Yeah,
it?
go ahead.
Yes, I was able to generate a DNA profile for this sample.
From the steering wheel?
Yes.
Were you able to determine how many contributors were in? Well, let me ask you, was that a mixture?
It was a mixture. I have a major conclusive profile and the minor portion is inconclusive.
Okay. And for the minor, were you able to determine how many, I guess, contributors were in that mixture?
I have a minimum of 3 contributors.
Okay. Were you able to tell anything about the sex of the major contributor?
The major contributor is of male origin.
And were you able to tell anything about the sex of the minor contributors?
Since it's inconclusive, I didn't make any comparisons, or I didn't make any conclusions for the minor component.
Did you compare that major contributor DNA profile from the swab of the steering wheel to the known DNA profile of Alex Cox?
Yes, the major profile obtained from this item matches the DNA profile from Alexander Cox.
Do you have any statistics as to the frequency of that occurrence?
Yes.
Could you tell us those?
May I read from my report?
Go ahead.
The frequency of occurrence of an unrelated individual in a random population having the same genetic profile as the major DNA profile obtained from this item is approximately 1 in 975 sextillion African Americans, 1 in 111 quintillion Caucasians, and 1 in 344 quintillion Southwestern Hispanics.
What is a quintillion?
A quintillion is a 1 followed by 18 zeros.
Were you provided with additional other swab cuttings to also attempt to develop DNA profiles?
Yes.
Were you provided with a cutting from the passenger seat belt buckle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
No, this profile was inconclusive due to an insufficient amount of DNA.
What does that mean?
It means that I didn't have enough information to conclusively give any results that are reliable.
So it doesn't mean there's no DNA there.
Correct.
Just means you didn't get enough DNA to do any type of comparison.
Yes.
Okay. Were you provided with a cutting from Lisa Perry from the swab from the passenger interior door handle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile for that?
No, this was also an inconclusive DNA result.
Was there again insufficient DNA?
Yes.
Were you provided with swabs from the lug nuts from the spare tire of that Jeep vehicle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
No, this DNA profile was inconclusive due to an insufficient amount of DNA.
So again, there's DNA there, correct?
Correct.
But just not enough of it for you to do any comparisons.
Yes.
Were you provided with a cutting of the swab from the gear shift of that Jeep?
Yes.
And were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes, this is a DNA mixture that indicates that there's at least 3 individuals of male and female origin.
Did you have a major contributor to that DNA profile?
I did not.
Were you able to make any determinations as to sex of any of those contributors?
Yes, I made a determination that Alexander Cox cannot be eliminated as a contributor to the DNA mixture.
What does that mean?
That means that when looking at the DNA profile that I generated from the gear shifter, the different numbers that I have on my DNA profile for the gear shifter, the numbers that Alexander Cox has on his DNA profile, he cannot be eliminated from my conclusive locations. So for example, if he has, let's say, a 7 and an 8 at one location, the DNA profile that I generated from the gear shifter also has those same numbers. So there's not a difference in the profile from the gear shifter and the profile from Alexander Cox.
Now, so for the gear shift, you can't eliminate him because there's no inconsistencies in those profiles. There's just not enough information for you to make that conclusion?
Yes, there's no inconsistencies between the two.
Thank you. Were you provided with cuttings from the swab from Lisa Perry from the driver's side seatbelt buckle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes, the major DNA profile from this item matches the DNA profile from Alexander Cox.
So is that a mixture then?
It is a mixture. The minor is inconclusive and the major is conclusive.
So the major was the DNA profile that you compared then to Alex Cox?
The major profile that I obtained matches Alexander Cox, correct?
And did you have statistics for the frequency of occurrence for this match from the driver's side seat belt buckle when you compared that DNA profile to Alexander Cox?
Yes. The frequency of occurrence of an unrelated individual in a random population having the same genetic profile as the major DNA profile obtained from this item is approximately 1 in 123 nonillion African Americans, 1 in 715 septillion Caucasians, and 1 in 2.78 octillion Southwestern Hispanics.
Septillion. I think that's a different number. What is that?
Septillion is a 1 followed by 24 zeros.
So a higher frequency even than the other match.
Yes.
So in this case, 2 of the swabs that you tested, both the steering wheel itself and the driver's side seat belt buckle, had major contributors where the DNA profile from those 2 items matched the DNA profile of Alexander Cox.
Yes.
Did that conclude your involvement in comparing these swabs to the known sample of Alexander Cox?
It did.
Thank you. The state has no other questions.
Cross?
No questions, Your Honor.
Any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I don't see any. All right, thank you. You can step down.
Thank you.
All right, let's recess for lunch. Can we resume at 1:15, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. We'll resume at 1:15. Please remember the admonition.
All rise for the jury.
All right, please be seated. The jury is no longer present. After a sidebar, I marked Exhibit 202, Defense Exhibit 202. This is base stamps 2714. The purpose for that is just for appeal purposes on, so the substance is there for the record as to why I denied the defendant going into this in much detail with that particular witness. So just for the record, that will not be provided to the jury when they deliberate. All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. No defense. There's a draft of final instructions there. Please take a look at those when you get a chance. All right, we'll be at recess till 1:15.
Thank you.
Who's the state going to call next?
Kyle Mueller. Kyle Mueller?
Okay. You want to get
Yeah, I can go
ready?
get him.
All right, we'll bring the jury in.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
All rise for the jury.
All right, please be seated. The jury is present. We're back on the record. The state can call its next witness.
I have a second that. State calls Kyle Mueller.
All right, sir, come on up. Please stand in front of my clerk here and be sworn in.
Can you please spell your first name? Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
All right, you're going to have a go up this ramp. Have a seat to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. My name is Kyle Mueller. I'm a forensic scientist section supervisor with the City of Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab
How long have you worked for the City of Phoenix Crime Lab?
for about 24 years now.
And can you tell us the different duties you have done over those 24 years?
Sure. I started out in the controlled substances section where I analyzed illicit drugs for the presence or absence of an illicit drug. I then transferred to the trace evidence section in 2007 and was a forensic scientist 2, and then a forensic scientist 3, and then a 4, and then now I'm the supervisor. In the trace evidence section, I analyze gunshot residue kits, footwear and tire track impression evidence, fibers, tape, and miscellaneous unknowns.
Can you tell us the education and training you've had in the area of trace evidence specific to GSR, gunshot residue?
Sure. Well, to start, I have a bachelor's of science in biochemistry. That's from the University of Arizona. I also have a master's of science in forensic science from the University of Florida. I've been trained by senior members of the crime lab, but I've also received several training opportunities for trace evidence, whether it's internal or external where possible. Specifically towards gunshot residue, there's a lot of history in the scientific literature for reading about what GSR is and how it's created. It's also a matter of going through the specific training program with the Phoenix PD Crime Lab. So I went through that, and I'm also proficiency tested on a yearly basis.
Can you tell us how long was that training at the City of Phoenix to work in the trace area?
Well, the training is ongoing, but so each subdiscipline in trace evidence, you need to go through the training program and then become competent in that subdiscipline. And for specifically, for gunshot residue, it was about 6 to 8 months.
And then you said you have ongoing proficiency training. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. Every year I receive a proficiency test to verify that I'm valid or competent in analyzing gunshot residue.
Well, let's start with then, what is gunshot residue?
Sure. Gunshot residue, or GSR for short, are small metallic particles that are formed from the discharge of a firearm. So when someone shoots a gun, these small particles are made up of the elements of lead, antimony, and barium that are from the primer paste inside the bottom of a cartridge casing. That primer paste essentially is disintegrated, and we're left with these GSR particles that escape from any part of the firearm that's not completely closed in the manufacturing process. There are effectively 3 classifications that we test for gunshot residue. There's characteristic particles that have all 3 elements of lead, antimony, and barium. There's also consistent particles that have 2 of the 3 of those, so lead and barium, or lead and antimony, or antimony and barium. There's also commonly associated particles, and those are just lead particles. So that plume of smoke that you see when you shoot a gun, a lot of that plume, if you will, are these small metallic particles.
When that plume lands on things, is it visible? Can I look over here and say, hey, there's a GSR particle?
No, these are very small. They're anywhere from 5, 10, maybe 5 or 15 microns in width. To give you an example, if you were to take a cross-section of a human hair, that's around 60 to 90 microns. So these are very small particles. You can't see them with the naked eye. We have a very high-powered microscope in the in the trace evidence section called an SEM, and that's what we use for our analysis.
So does it matter if someone fires a handgun or a rifle? Is it going to be the same particles you're looking for?
Those same particles are generated regardless of the caliber of firearm used or the ammunition used. We still look for those 3 elements within that same type of particle.
When someone discharges a gun, what factors might impact whether or not that GSR residue particles are left on a person or objects around the gun?
Well, you can imagine that when someone shoots a gun, it's kind of like that plume of smoke that's generated. It's kind of like smoking a cigarette. That plume of smoke is going to travel one way or the other based on if you're outside, if you're inside, if you're and it's a windy day, or if it's raining. So if you're in an enclosed space, depending on where the wind velocity is, it's going to depend on where that travels.
So if a person fires a gun from inside a vehicle while it's parked, would you in general expect to find GSR particles inside that vehicle?
Yes, it's certainly possible.
Okay. Can GSR particles over time get lost or removed from whatever object they have attached to after the gun is discharged?
So these particles, like I said before, they're like a fine metallic dust. They don't have a half-life. They don't decay over time. They don't evaporate. They're simply just washed away. So if GSR particles are found on an object, they will stay there indefinitely until they're washed away.
Okay. Have you seen cases where GSR was found inside a vehicle weeks or months after someone has fired a gun inside that car?
It's possible, yes.
In a case where it's alleged that a person was inside a rear portion of a Jeep and fired a rifle out the back window, would it be within the normal scope of possibilities to locate GSR on the windows of that vehicle a month after the shooting?
It's possible, yes.
Would it be impacted if, say, someone went in the Jeep and sprayed some Windex and cleaned off all the windows? Would that then remove it?
Yes, it would possibly remove any GSR.
So when we're talking about collection of an item that's not immediately after the discharge, does the fact of someone cleaning or not cleaning the area around the discharge impact the potential to collect those particles?
Yes, they would potentially remove those particles.
Can you tell us, in general, what you are provided with and then how you look for GSR particles with the kit you are given?
Sure. Depending on the case, a general GSR kit has vials inside of that kit. They're labeled usually about where they are collected from. There's essentially a plastic vial, and when you open up, when you open up the cap to that plastic vial, on the inside of that cap is a small aluminum stub that has effectively sticky tape on it. And that tape is used to sample an area. The portion being, or the idea behind that is that if you have GSR on an area, whether it's someone's hands or an inanimate object, you would then stub that sample, and then any GSR on that sample will then be transferred to that stub. Now, those GSR stubs are then introduced as evidence into the laboratory, and that's where I come in and I test that evidence. So the GSR vials and those stubs are essentially, they come in a GSR kit that's labeled depending on the evidence, and then start my note-taking process regarding what the GSR labels say, where they're taken from, and then I essentially take those stubs out of those vials and place them in an instrument called an SEM EDS. And that essentially stands for Scanning Electron Microscopy with Energy Dispersive X-ray Spectroscopy. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm introducing those stubs into that SEM, because it's a very high-powered microscope to view these very small particles. I then analyze the kit with a program that we have for looking for GSR particles. The program then generates a report of what it found, and then I go back typically the next day and try to determine if these were actual GSR particles that were detected by the instrument or whether they were not. And then I compile my report with my results.
You told us earlier that there are 3 different elements you are looking for. What is the significance of locating 1, 2 of them together, or all 3 of those elements together in one particle?
So one particle that has all 3 elements is called characteristic, meaning that is unlikely to have come from any other source in the environment other than from the discharge of a firearm. 2 of those, so a consistent particle is 2 of those elements, so lead and antimony, or lead and barium, or antimony and barium. And those are consistent particles, meaning that while they're also associated with the discharge of a firearm, they're also found in the environment. Lead is a commonly associated with particle, and while it's found in the environment, it's also found in, again, GSR, this plume of smoke that we see when someone discharges a weapon.
So you told us you work for the Phoenix Police Department. Do you still, or does your agency assist other agencies with processing GSR kits?
Yes, we do.
On January of 2020, were you provided with 2 GSR collection kits from the Gilbert Police Department?
Yes, I was.
And were those marked with the Gilbert property identification numbers of 645-886 and 645-888?
Yes.
Were you asked to analyze these?
I was.
When you receive those, do you note whether or not they are integrity seals have been kept there and that they are still properly sealed when they arrive to you?
Yes, I do.
And were they still properly sealed with all integrity seals on them?
Yes, they were.
Now, the kits or the vials, do those come inside their own container, and then each vial itself is also individually sealed with the tag, I guess?
So the vials themselves that have the GSR stubs in them aren't individually sealed. They're usually anyway 3 to 4 of a pack, if you will, of vials. And then inside of that, those vials are then inside another envelope, which is inside the GSR kit.
Do the vials, though, have their own, I guess you indicated label, tape, whatever we want to say, going around them indicating what each one is from?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, when you received those 2 kits, each of the vials had their own tape with the labeling and then were packaged in sealed packaging.
Yes, that's correct.
And when you were provided with these 2 items, these 2 kits, did you, can you tell us what your initial process was?
Sure. I received notification from the Gilbert Police Department of where exactly these GSR vials were collected, so I could get a better idea of what to test first. So I got that information, and then I started my analysis on one of the GSR kits from 3 of the vials were from the inside of the Jeep, specifically the windows.
Why did you want to test the windows of the Jeep versus the tabs it may have been from, say, the back of the seats of the Jeep?
Well, testing the windows first I thought was pertinent because they're more likely to not come into contact with an item that would previously had GSR on it. If GSR is on the inside of a window, unless it's been cleaned, it would probably be there still.
Okay. The GSR kit that you decided to test, did that contain stubs from the passenger side interior back window, the passenger side interior window, and the driver's side interior window?
Yes.
I assume you used the same process with the SEM microscope that you described?
Yes, that's correct.
And then you independently confirm whether or not what the microscope located is in fact the items it indicates?
Correct.
For this one, starting with the passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles in that collection kit commonly associated with GSR?
Yes.
And so again, so we understand for commonly associated, what does that mean?
That means those are lead particles.
Okay, so just the single individual lead particles, and you found those on that stub.
Correct.
So for that same passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles consistent with GSR?
Yes, I did.
And again, just so we understand, what does consistent with GSR mean?
That means 2 of the 3 elements from a characteristic particle are present.
And do you in fact even note how many of those particles you find?
Yes, I do.
When you are looking for those, do you count every single one on the entire stub? Or do you at some point say that's enough to show they're there?
After 10, essentially, I stop. So if it's anything less than 10, I count and put that in my notes.
All right. When you were looking at this passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles that were characteristic of GSR?
Yes, I did.
And again, what does characteristic mean?
That means it has one particle that has the elements of lead, antimony, and barium that is kind of a round or amorphous morphology that is characteristic of being from the discharge of a firearm.
Okay. So when you located the commonly associated, consistent with, and characteristic particles, what was your conclusion as to the kit that was used to collect from the passenger side interior back window?
Again, that area of the Jeep is consistent with being in the vicinity of a discharged firearm or even coming into contact with something that had GSR on it.
Okay. Was one of the other vials that we discussed from the passenger interior window?
Yes.
Did you find any particles commonly associated with GSR on that stub?
Yes, I did.
How about consistent with or characteristic of?
No, I did not.
So what was your conclusion as to that vial where you just had particles commonly associated with GSR?
So to back up, when I put together my report, I took the results from all 3 samples that I tested and made my conclusion on that. If I'm looking at individual vials, so the vial that we just spoke about that had just the commonly associated with, That means that, again, a discharged weapon could have occurred within the vicinity of that sample being taken, but it could also come from an environmental source as well. But that's just for that one sample.
In a vehicle where a gun is discharged and the samples aren't collected till about a month later, why is it important to look at multiple locations?
Well, so when a gun is discharged and you think of that plume of smoke, that those GSR particles are going to travel anywhere potentially in the inside of that vehicle. So any of those areas could potentially have GSR on them. So when I when I performed my analysis on those samples, really finding where they are specifically in the Jeep isn't really an indication that something happened. It was just finding any in the Jeep. So it doesn't really matter where they originated or where I found them. It's just that they were present.
Okay. So you're really just looking to see, are those characteristic particles present within this Jeep that would indicate that a gun may have been discharged within that vehicle?
That is correct.
So we talked about 2 of the 3 vials. Was the third vial the driver's side interior window?
Yes.
Did you find particles commonly associated with GSR on that vial from the driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
Did you find particles consistent with GSR on that driver's side interior window?
Yes.
And did you find particles characteristic of GSR on that driver's side passenger or driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
When you then were looking at all 3 of those in different areas within that Jeep, were you then able to reach an overall conclusion as to this vehicle where these kits were taken from?
Yes, I was.
What was your conclusion?
That the inside of the vehicle was, again, in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged or came into contact with an item that had GSR on it.
Okay. And then given the locations of the collection sites, that was done to try to look for places where potentially the areas may not have been washed?
Correct.
And when you were talking about something coming into contact with those locations, are you also thinking about the fact that if someone puts a gun in their car, it's not usually on a window?
Correct. I wouldn't test like the back seat of a vehicle knowing that someone used that vehicle to go hunting or go to a shooting range in case they put their firearm in the back of their vehicle.
So if the collection had only been, for instance, of the seats of the vehicles, that may have been less, that may have played into your conclusion some?
My first initial analysis, yes.
In this case, because you were looking at windows in this vehicle, were those stubs specifically chosen by you because they were the windows that were collected?
Yes.
I have no other questions for this witness.
All right, cross.
Just a few questions. Mr. Mueller, you had said that a gun may have been discharged in this vehicle. Is that your conclusion?
Yes.
Okay. And just so I understand, because I'm trying to wrap my head around that, the 3 particles altogether, right?
Yes.
Antimony, barium, and lead, all 3 make it actually GSR. Is that correct?
So there's 3 classifications. All 3 of those elements in one particle is considered a characteristic particle, which is considered a GSR particle. But there's also the 2-component and the 1-component particles that I detected are also considered GSR.
Right. And so in your report, you say they're also found from a number of relatively common non-firearm sources. Is that also correct?
It's possible, yes.
And what are the non-firearm sources? Could you tell me some of those?
Sure. For lead, lead used to be prominent In gasoline and paint years ago, lead can still be used in solder or varying manufacturing facilities. The two component particles are less common, but they also can be found in maybe some cosmetics or fireworks. But again, those are less common.
Okay. So would you find an actual GSR where all three elements were together in fireworks? Like if a firework went off in the vicinity?
No, ma'am.
You would never find GSR after fireworks?
Three component particle, no.
So you would find either consistent or commonly associated?
It's possible depending on the firework.
Okay. What about from brake dust?
Again, that's possible, yes.
What about from fertilizer?
I'm not familiar with fertilizer having those specific elements.
What about hairspray?
I'm not familiar with hairspray being a component or having those components.
Okay. So of the kits that you took, of the stubs that you had that you actually tested, how many all three particles did you find together, grouped together?
So two, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side on the inside windows.
So just two?
Correct.
And so if a firearm were to be shot in the back of the Jeep, would you expect to find more than two from all the stubs that you analyzed?
It's difficult to determine how many particles are actually there. I'm essentially getting a sample of that area. So the number is not really pertinent to my analysis.
So is it safe to say that whoever was the person who got the stubs would be deciding what you would end up analyzing later? You wouldn't have any control over that, right?
Correct. I didn't collect the stubs.
Okay. So out of the two that you found, out of how many stubs did you actually analyze? I'm sorry, I missed that.
So I analyzed three. In total, there were 8 collected.
Okay. That's all, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Just briefly. For the characteristic particles with all three elements, did you find one of those in the passenger side interior back window?
Yes.
And did you find 2 of those characteristic particles in the driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
You were asked about some different things like hairspray and brake dust. Are those things that would create the 3-particle characteristic items that we're talking about that are characteristic of GSR?
No, they would not.
So no matter how much hairspray we use in the car, you're not going to get antimony, barium, and lead stuck together into a particle?
No.
No matter how many fireworks we blow off in the back of this Jeep, we're not going to get the antimony, the barium, and the lead together as a characteristic particle?
No, ma'am.
So is this why it doesn't really matter how many you find? The fact that it's there is what's important?
Correct.
Because when you find the particles that have all 3 of those, that is what's the most meaningful of all of this.
Yes.
And that's because for the single just lead, we could come up with some reason why that might be there, right?
Correct.
And for even the consistent with, maybe you can come up with some reasons why it's there.
Correct.
But when we start talking about those characteristic particles, that means it's gunshot residue.
Correct. And the reason why I list out the other 2 classes, if you will, the consistent and commonly associated with, is because I expect to see all 3 types in the discharge of a firearm.
So when we are looking for the discharge of a firearm in a, we'll call it vehicle, as we were talking about here, you wouldn't expect to only find the characteristic particles.
No, I would not.
You would expect to find the single particles, the two combination, and all three together.
That's correct.
Exactly what you found here.
Correct.
I have no other questions.
Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I don't see any, sir. You can step down.
Thank you.
State can call its next witness.
Thank you.
All right, sir, come on up. You're going to stand right here in front of my clerk, be sworn in.
Good afternoon. Can you please spell your first and last name? Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, you're going to walk around the court reporter. Have a seat to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Ray Hermosillo. I'm employed with the Rexburg Police Department.
Where is Rexburg Police Department?
Rexburg is a little town in southeast Idaho.
How long have you worked for the Rexburg Police Department?
I've been with Rexburg since 2001.
And can you tell us your different jobs or duties over the years at that department?
Sure. I started in patrol in 2001 as a normal patrolman. I worked patrol for about 18 years before I was promoted to detective in 2019. During that 18 years, I was able to obtain numerous certificates. I currently hold a supervisor certificate and an advanced certificate through Post Academy. In 2019, I was promoted to detective. I currently am a lieutenant over the detective division.
So in 2019, you were working as a detective in Rexburg. How big is that city?
Rexburg is roughly probably 40,000.
Okay. How many detectives are there?
Currently, we have 7 detectives for the 40,000 people.
And back in 2019?
About the same, 7.
Okay. And did you cover sort of any investigations in every investigation as a detective in Rexburg?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to bring you to November 1st of 2019. Did you speak with a Detective Nolan McDermott from the Gilbert Police Department here in Arizona?
I did.
Were you asked to aid the Gilbert Police Department by locating and impounding a 2018 Jeep Wrangler with a Texas license plate LWD 0997?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you provided with an address where that Jeep might be located?
I was.
Are you familiar with 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, Rock Creek townhomes.
Okay. So those are townhomes. Are there multiple units there?
Correct.
Were you provided with a unit 175 that would potentially be relevant to this case?
Yes, I was told that 175 was where I needed to focus. 175, 174.
When you were given this information, were you provided with a probable cause statement from Detective McDermott?
I was on November 1st of 2019.
And knowing that you were going to be looking for this Jeep to seize it, did you obtain a search warrant?
Yes, I did.
So on November 1st, did you go out to 565 Pioneer Road? Unit
did.
175?
Yes, we did.
Did you go with someone else?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Did you go with someone else or were you by yourself?
No, I went with other detectives.
And what did you do when you got out there?
We were asked by Gilbert Police to perform intermittent surveillance to see if we can locate the 2018 Jeep Wrangler. So that's exactly what we did. We went out, performed surveillance, and we were unable to locate the Jeep on November 1st.
Now, had you been provided with the name Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Had you been provided with the name Alexander Cox?
Yes, we have.
Were you looking for the Jeep that belonged to Lori Vallow?
Correct.
Okay. When you were doing surveillance of Unit 175, did you take any photos of the individuals who you saw going into and out of that residence?
We did. We took a couple photos of some individuals coming out of the garage and going into the garage area of 175.
Did you see that person go into any vehicles?
We did.
Was that a male or female you saw?
That was a female, Lori Vallow.
Do you see that person that you saw going in and out of Unit 175 and getting in and out of the vehicle that you saw in Rexburg, Idaho on November 1st in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you point her out and tell us what she's wearing?
She is at the defendant's table in a blue coat with a light blue shirt and red glasses.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
Good job.
Did you, in fact, follow Ms. Vallow in a vehicle to another location and back to the Unit 175?
We did. We followed her to Walgreens in Rexburg off of Main Street, and then followed her back to her residence at 175.
What kind of vehicle was she driving at that time?
A blue Nissan Rogue.
Okay. I've shown defendant exhibits 126 and 127. If I may have my paralegal approach. And you said you took photos of those. I'm showing you 126 and 127. Can you let me know if you recognize those? Do you recognize those as photos taken from surveillance on November 1st of 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
State will move to admit 126 and 127.
Any objection?
Just relevance, Your Honor.
They're admitted. 126, 127.
Now, you told us that, if I can have the Elmo, that the defendant, Ms. Vallow, was driving a blue Nissan Rogue. Did that have an Arizona license plate of CRT 2994?
Yes, ma'am.
We're showing here exhibit 126. I'm going to pull out some. Although we can't really see well. When there's no glare, is Ms. Vallow going into the residence here?
That is correct. That's Miss Vallow.
And this is Unit 175.
Correct.
And then 127 is her going further into it, albeit the glare here, we can't really see that.
Yes, ma'am.
So did you find the Jeep that you were looking for, that 2018 Jeep with the Texas plates when you were there on November 1st?
No, we did not. Not on November 1st.
Did you search the whole complex?
We did.
So did you go back again later to try to locate the Jeep?
Yes, we looked for the Jeep. November 1st was a Friday in 2019. We looked for the Jeep all weekend and were unable to locate it. I was finally able to locate it Monday morning, November 4th.
So did you went back to look again on Monday morning to 565 Pioneer Road and you saw the Jeep?
I was on my way home from the gym and looked over to my right and saw the Jeep parked outside of apartment 175.
What did you do when you saw it?
I had Erickson Tow Company seize the Jeep and tow it to our impound lot.
Is that an internal or external lot?
We have both external and internal, but we towed it and put it inside our impound lot, inside.
Did you let the Gilbert Police Department know you had located and seized that Jeep?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Did you attempt to contact Lori Vallow to let her know you took the Jeep?
We did several times that day. We made attempts to go over and knock on the door to let Miss Vallow know that we had her Jeep in case they wondered if it was stolen or impounded. And we were unable at any time to make contact with Miss Vallow, and nobody had called the police department stating their Jeep was missing either.
So you never received a call from Lori Vallow to report her Jeep stolen?
No,
Never got a call from Alex Cox saying a Jeep was stolen?
no.
So you have the Jeep on the 4th of November. Do you coordinate with the Gilbert Police Department for them to come to Rexburg, Idaho to be able to process the Jeep?
We did.
Did you in fact author the search warrant for them to be able to take things like DNA swabs and GSR kits and things like that?
Yes.
Were you present when that search warrant was executed on November 18th of 2019?
Yes, I was.
Were you just watching and allowing them to do the processing?
That's correct.
When you were there on November 18th, as well as when you impounded the Jeep, did you note anything about the tinting on the rear windows of that Jeep?
I noticed that the tinting on the Jeep was extremely dark. It appeared darker than Idaho state law allows.
From the outside, trying to look inside, were you able to see into the vehicle?
Not unless I got right up to the window.
Okay. Did you learn during this investigation that that Jeep had been taken to Dan Moss's tinting on September 25th to have those windows tinted?
I did learn that later on in the investigation, yes.
Okay. But at that time, you did not know that?
That's correct.
On December 18th of 2019 was a second search warrant executed on that Jeep Wrangler.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you author that search warrant as well?
I did.
And were you again present for the execution of that search warrant?
Yes, I was.
Were photographs taken of the Jeep?
Yes, they were.
Were photographs taken of receipts inside the Jeep?
Yes.
When the Jeep was being processed on December 18th and photographs were taken of the receipts, did you note a receipt inside that was related to or that came from Arizona?
Yes, I did.
Did you notice a receipt from Arizona that was from October 1st of 2019?
Yes, I did.
Understanding that you were being asked by the Gilbert Police to investigate a shooting on October 2nd, did you feel that was relevant?
Yes, ma'am.
Shown the defendant exhibits 128 through 134, if I can have my paralegal approach. Do you recognize those as photos taken of the Jeep from the search warrant that was executed on December 18th of 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
State will move to admit 128 through 134.
Any objection?
No objection.
128 through 134 admitted.
So 128, were these just some overall photos of this Jeep?
Yes, that's correct.
In 129, Do we see a tag from Texas that also reflects the license plate number up here, the LWD 0997?
Yes.
Is this, again, the side to show that dark tinting on that?
Correct.
That's the license plate that was on the Jeep that you impounded?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that show the whole back of the Jeep?
Yes.
I know you were present both on November 18th and now on December 18th, a month later. When this Jeep was being processed with this tire on it, were you guys able to open that rear window while the tire was still on the Jeep?
No, we weren't able to.
And then is this the other side of the Jeep itself?
Correct.
In Exhibit 134, does this show sort of different receipts and stuff found in the Jeep itself?
Yes.
And does that include, focus? A receipt from Los Favoritos at 5351 South Power Road in Mesa, Arizona?
Correct.
And does it show a date of October 1 of 2019?
Yes.
And although it's getting blurry here, is it the timestamp 1312 hours?
Yes, it is.
So this receipt, let me ask you this. From the time that you impounded the Jeep on November 4th, was it always in your custody until this executed search warrant on December 18th?
Yes, it was.
And so this Jeep that you impounded on November 4th had a receipt from October 1st of 2019 at 1312 hours from a restaurant in Mesa, Arizona.
That's correct.
And you were aware at that time that Brandon Boudreaux had been shot at on October 2nd, 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
So this was from the day before.
Right.
When you were working with the Gilbert Police Department, you told us that you had done some surveillance from November 1st until you recovered the Jeep on November 4th. Later in November, did you have some additional time to do surveillance at the 565 Pioneer Road? Specifically November 26th.
Yes, we did.
On November 26th, did you have contact with a person by the name of Chad Daybell?
Yes, I did.
On November 26th of 2019, who did you understand that to be in relation to Lori Vallow?
Lori's current husband.
Was there anyone with Chad Daybell when you saw him on November 26th?
It was also Lori's brother, Alex Cox, that was with Chad Daybell at that time.
Can you describe for us the circumstance you saw these two on November 26th? Where were they? Were they around a vehicle, around a townhome?
So when we made contact with Chad, and Alex, they were unloading Alex's pickup truck, unloading items from the back of it into the garage of apartment 175. And that's when I initially made contact with both of them.
You said that they were getting out of a vehicle. What kind of vehicle was it?
It was a gold Ford pickup truck.
Was it a Ford F-150?
Yes.
Do you recall if it had Arizona plates on it?
It did have Arizona plates.
Were they, I guess, personalized plates?
They were personalized.
Was that a CPQUINT?
Yes, CP Quint.
At this time, when you are at this apartment complex on November 26th, is it your understanding that Lori Vallow is living at those Rock Creek townhomes?
That's correct.
And was it your understanding at that time that Alex Cox was living in the Rock Creek townhomes as well on November 26th.
At that time, yes, we knew he was at the Rock Creek townhomes.
I've shown the defendant Exhibit 135. I could outline her legal approach.
Thank you.
Is that just sort of an aerial overview of the Rock Creek apartments that we're talking about
Yes, it is.
at 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that show where Unit 175 is?
Does.
State will move to admit 135.
Any objection?
Just foundation, Your Honor.
135 is admitted.
Thank you. Okay. So we see here, this is Pioneer Road. Is this the Rock Creek townhomes?
Yes, it is.
Using Exhibit 135, are you able to tell us approximately where Unit 175 is located?
Is there a pointer I can use, or?
Could he point to the
Behind you.
TV behind you?
Look behind.
If you could get up and,
Go ahead.
thank you. So if you could point to, yeah,
175, the back of 175 is roughly here, and the front door is this way. So the garage, where I first made contact with Alex and Chad both, we're right back here.
Detective, maybe if you could go to this side. Sorry, just the other side so the jury doesn't have to look through you. Thank you.
The Jeep was located on November 4th, parked in a stall right here.
So that's where you located it on the 4th, and that's right near the 175 you're describing?
Correct, right in front of the 175 garage.
Now, you told us that you also knew that at that time Alex Cox was living at the Rock Creek townhomes. Can you show us where that was, what unit that was, approximately?
107 is where Alex Cox was living, and it was roughly here, the front door to 107.
Okay. During this time on November 26th, did you learn that a Melanie Boudreaux was also living at the Rock Creek townhomes?
Yes, I did.
What unit did she live in?
She lived in 174, which is right next door to Ms. Vallow's residence at 175.
Okay. Thank you. You can be seated now. Now, did you become, were documentation obtained along with an affidavit for the rental application for Lori Vallow to live at 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, they were.
Did the documentation show her as renting Unit 107?
Yes, it showed Lori Vallow as the renter of apartment 107.
Did you ever see her over at apartment 107?
No, I didn't.
So on November 1st, you saw her at 175?
That's correct.
Your Honor, the state will move to admit Exhibit 162, which is pursuant to 803 and 902 with the affidavit authenticating them from the custodian of records.
All right. Any objection?
No objection.
Can you give me that number again?
162.
162 is admitted.
So 162, we see the application for Lori Vallow to rent 565 Pioneer Road, number 7. Is that correct?
Number 107, yes.
107. And that was submitted on August 14th?
Correct, the way I understand it.
Okay. And did that indicate a vehicle of a Jeep Wrangler with the LWD 0997?
Yes,
That's the Jeep that you impounded on the 4th?
that's correct.
And did it also indicate a Nissan Rogue blue, no license plate at that time?
Correct.
And is that the type of vehicle that you had seen Lori Vallow driving when you were doing surveillance on the 1st of November?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you told us that Alex Cox also lived in this townhome complex. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know what unit he rented in his paperwork? Was it 175?
Yes, Alex was the renter in apartment 175.
Now, we're talking about November 26, where you're doing some surveillance. You have interactions with Chad Daybell and with Alex Cox outside of Unit 175.
Correct.
Did you go to Unit 105 to see if Lori Vallow was there?
We went to Unit 107
107, yeah, I'm sorry.
to see if Lori was there, and there was nobody there at that apartment.
Were you aware then that the rental paperwork for Alex Cox, along with an affidavit authenticating those records being kept in the normal course of business, was obtained from the Rooftop Real Estate Management Company for Alex Cox's rental of Unit 175?
Yes, we didn't obtain that on the 26th of November, but later throughout the investigation, yes, ma'am.
Correct. State will move to admit those pursuant to 803 and 902, Exhibit 160.
Any objection?
No objection.
160 is admitted.
And so, although this is a tough thing to read, do we see the 26th day of August of 2019, Alexander Cox?
Yes.
And does the letter from the Realty Management say that Alex Cox had rented 565 Pioneer at Unit 175?
That's correct.
Now, you told us that on the 26th of November, you had contact with Chad Daybell and Alex Cox near Unit 175. Did you go to Unit 175 to see if anyone was inside there?
We knocked on apartment 175. We also knocked on apartment 174, which is where Lori's niece lived, to see if maybe they were over there. And we were unable to make contact with anybody at all three apartments.
Okay. Now, the next day on November 27th, were search warrants executed on Units 107, 174, and 175?
Yes, they were.
Was anyone home in any three of these residents when they were executed?
No, there was not.
I'm going to talk about Unit 107, the one that was in the rental paperwork rented to Lori Vallow. Can you describe for us what you saw when you went into that unit?
Apartment 107 was completely vacant. It looked like everybody had moved out. There wasn't anything in the entire apartment, so we assumed that nobody had lived there because it was vacant.
So no furniture?
No, ma'am.
No groceries?
Nothing. Like it was ready to be moved in for a new tenant.
Okay. When you went into Unit 175, where you had seen Miss Vallow going into previously after making the trip to the Walgreens on November 1st, what did it look like inside that unit?
So 175 was different. There was furniture, food in the pantry, food in the refrigerator, beds. It looked like somebody was living there. But as we went upstairs into the master bedroom and other bedrooms, the entire closet was completely empty, other than just empty hangers. So it looked like somebody had just grabbed everything hanging. There were no clothes, and just took off with what they had.
Were photographs taken inside Unit 565 of 565 Pioneer Road, Unit 175 during that search warrant?
Yes, photos and also a video.
Okay. Did each of these units have their own garage as well?
They did.
So I'm going to start with the interior of that residence. When you were inside Unit 175, did you see any documentation in there relating to renting a storage unit for Lori Vallow?
Yes, we did. We found a rental agreement in the master bedroom on what I believe to be was a copier, where it detailed the address of the storage unit, self-storage plus, and also the storage unit number, which was C52.
Your Honor, I've shown the defendant Exhibit 136 through 138, if my paralegal can approach.
Thank you.
And is that showing sort of the outside of the unit and then a photograph of that document that you located that you just told us about?
Yes, ma'am.
State will move to admit 136 through 138.
Any objection?
No objection.
136 through 138 are admitted.
Okay. So 137, do we see the front of units 175? Oops.
Yeah, it's cut off.
May
just a
pull
little.
out.
There you go. Yes, 175. It's the one with the toys out front.
Where would 174 be in relation to this?
To the left of that apartment.
So
Yep,
this
right
one?
over there.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So this apartment was technically rented to Alex Cox, but inside it had some indicia of Lori Vallow.
That's correct.
And I'm putting up 138. So when we see this, we see at the top you said C52. Is that a storage unit location?
That's the number of the storage unit at the storage location, correct?
Okay. And down here, do we see a date when this was executed?
Yes, October 1st, 2019.
And what name is on this?
Lori Ryan.
Did you learn in your investigation that Lori Vallow, before she became Lori Vallow, was Lori Ryan?
That's correct.
So she was Lori Ryan, then Lori Vallow, and now Lori Daybell?
Correct.
Does this show the location of the storage facility?
Yes, it does.
Self-storage plus at 433 Airport Road?
Yes, ma'am.
Where is that in relation to 565 Pioneer Road? Is it far away?
No, it's roughly probably a half a mile north. If you stay on Pioneer, you'll run right into Airport Road. It is on the north side of Main Street, so about a half a mile away.
inside the residence, did you see any like women's clothing or anything else like that that appeared to be consistent with Lori Vallow? And I know you told us most of it was gone.
We found women's clothing in the garage in apartment 175.
So in the garage, can you describe for us what the garage was like? I mean, what did you see when you went into the garage? Was there cars in there?
No, so in the garage of 175, there were boxes. It appeared people had been moving things into the garage of 175. So there were plastic containers full of various items. There were boxes full of clothes. There were prepper barrels for water storage. Just various different things that it looked like people had moved in.
So in addition to having furniture and clothing and all sorts of stuff, did you find any paperwork in the garage that was related to Alex Cox?
We did.
Things like passports and bills.
Correct.
Did you find any weapons in the garage?
We found several weapons in the garage, yes.
Now, since you were working with the Gilbert Police Department, had you been advised that Brandon Boudreaux had seen a rifle barrel come out of the Jeep Wrangler and then fire at him?
Correct.
So were you looking for any rifles when you were going through that garage?
Yes, we were.
Did you photograph all of those?
We did.
I've shown defendant exhibits 139 through 159. If I can have my paralegal approach.
Go ahead.
There's more live courtroom coverage coming up. Press subscribe now so you don't miss a second from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.